This is the All Rev'd Up podcast, season 6, episode 7. I'm Reverend Emmett Price.
And I'm Reverend Irene Monroe.
Before we jump into today's conversation on the Supreme Court's ruling on affirmative action, let us thank each of our listeners and viewers. This 6th season is all because of you. Thank you. Thank you for listening to us on the various podcast apps and for watching the actual live recording of the podcast on our YouTube channel. We are grateful for your support, your encouragement, your feedback, your reviews, and your comments. Thank you so much for sharing the podcast with others.
And as always, I want to convey a tsunami of thanks for your continued listening. And I'm hoping you all are enjoying the summer like Emmett and I.
The U.S. Supreme Court today dealt a major blow to affirmative action in higher education, striking down race-conscious admissions programs at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina.
In rulings divided along ideological lines, the court's 6-justice conservative majority said the schools discriminated against white and Asian American applicants by using race-conscious policies that benefited students from underrepresented backgrounds.
Affirmative action as a term actually entered the public lexicon back in 1935 with the Wagner Act, a federal law that gave workers the right to form and join unions. It was used to describe the process by which an employee would be given their job back if the National Labor Relations Board found they had been fired for union activity.
The NAACP is calling on more than 500 public schools, more than 1,300 private colleges and universities to end legacy preferences. Why is ending these legacy admissions such a big deal?
These preferences are not justified by any educational necessity because they don't really consider an applicant's credentials or their merits, but really only their familial ties. And they tend to favor applicants from predominantly white or affluent backgrounds.
John F. Kennedy was the first president to link the term specifically with policies meant to advance racial equality. And in the years after, the term started to be associated with education, a connection made thanks to the civil rights movement.
While the justice's ruling does not legally interfere with diversity in the workplace, experts say the move creates an opening for conservative groups to challenge business policies based on hiring and promoting minority employees.
We will comply with the court's decision, but it does not change our values. We continue to believe deeply that a thriving, diverse intellectual community is essential to academic excellence and critical to shaping the next generation of leaders.
On Thursday, June 29th, 2023, the United States Supreme Court, the highest court of the land, in a historic decision, ruled that race-conscious admissions at our nation's colleges and universities is unconstitutional. The cases, stemming from lawsuits at Harvard University, a private institution, and the University of North Carolina, a public educational system, created the long-awaited opportunity and the timing to have an ultra-conservative court accomplish a mission initiated long ago. Irene, where are we? What has just happened?
Okay. I have to laugh. I have to laugh because affirmative action has always affirmatively advantaged white people. So let me share with you some programs that white people have benefited across time. Redlining houses in black areas until they gentrify the area for their benefit, like Harlem. GI Bill benefiting white vets. Oh, the Bakke case in 1978 arguing for reverse discrimination. Oh, black taxes. And not to mention, Emmett, and we have mentioned this several times, I'm going to hit it again, 250 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate and equal. And when it comes to college admission, now let's look at what they did not strike down. Legacy admission, that means children and applicants of alums, is still in place. And the practice of giving preferential treatment in admissions to children of wealthy donors. Now, there shouldn't be a birthright to Harvard and these elite schools, because this is what I feel, and I bought into it. It negates the notion of meritocracy, educational parity that at least helped me a leg up and a foot out of my situation, access to quote unquote the American dream. And that's what I thought the 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education, was about. At least that's what I took away from it. But instead, that's what I took away from it. But instead, they have stigmatized affirmative action. They've called it racial quotas, that we're not qualified applicants. And then to further stigmatize it, you have this stuff of identity politics, that the conservative have certainly used against us. And it reinscribes the notion that we are, inherently inferior. But academic racism is what it is. It does not. It's nothing new. I think that what was very, very interesting here, the strategy to overturn it, really put Asian Americans, the model, quote, minority, against other minorities. And that was an intentionality because they stand in as a proxy, and the way I see it, for white people. But I just want to say this, Emmett. If there is a group, a demographic group, that has affirmatively benefited from affirmative action, and you know what that group is, Emmett? White women have benefited from affirmative action. The data has showed it over and over again, not just in terms of getting into colleges, but also into the workforce. Listen, we've seen it even in terms of getting elected to office here. So, my thing about it is that, we've always been struggling for this. I don't know if there's a really good way to work around it. Some have suggested, like, based on income and socioeconomic background. Another one that might work here is zip code, okay? Because if you don't live in the Harvard zip code and you live in the black area here in Cambridge, that might work. It might work, but then again, it wouldn't, because the programs at Cambridge, Rindge, and Latin track the kids. So the kids would not, in many ways, be qualified, legitimately, would not, because there's an intentionality here. But I ain't mad. Let me just say this. I ain't mad. You know why, Emmett? Because I ain't mad. Just let me say this quickly, and I want your thought on this. Okay, I'm not mad because we've seen this before. See, I'm 20 years. You're a senior. I've seen this before. And just because we're in Boston and we know about the Boston busing crisis, it was one of the last schools to desegregate. But let me tell you, we've seen this before, and I have an answer for it for folks who are upset about it and stuff. And one of them is the historically black colleges. We must not, my spouse went to one. We must understand, okay, and that's their slogan. A mind is a terrible thing to waste. And the point about it, we need to tell the truth about this, and I certainly want to get your opinion about it, is that, we've gone to these Ivy League schools, and we're supposedly well educated, but I just feel like I got the best education, having gone to Wellesley, Columbia, Harvard University, that white supremacy could possibly teach me. I'm so educated and so infused with white ideology. You know what? I don't need, listen, I done lost my race card. You can call me an Afro-Saxon. And you know what? Carter Wilson, Carter Wilson, who gives us Black History Month, he would call that the miseducation of the Negro. So, I have dealt with social isolation, cultural alienation, psychic trauma. Okay? Please, our leaders come from those schools. Work with me, Emmett, really.
Wow. Just wow. Affirmative action was first used, at least the term, in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy. And it was Executive Order number 10925. And I want to read this because it left a provision that government contractors could, and I quote, take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and employees are treated fairly during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin, end quote. This had nothing to do with black folks. But in this nation that we live in, we are so overly fascinated by race. And the people who are most overly fascinated by race are those who are holding on to the vestiges of white supremacist ideologies. Because in order to keep white supremacy going on, everybody else has to be otherized. That in order to continue to validate and verify this sense that white people are superior over everybody, then everybody else has to be put in another category. And so we have played with words. We have mislabeled and misidentified things like critical race theory. We have mislabeled and misidentified things like Black history and African American history. We have mislabeled and misidentified all kinds of things, creating fictitious and false narratives as forms of propaganda that have been spread. And now you have legislation being passed, and now the highest court of the land decides that something that was set up to be a step towards equality, equity, has now been removed. And the irony of this, Irene, is that you had two court cases, and the University of North Carolina case. Do you realize that University of North Carolina didn't admit Black undergrads until 1955? And the only reason that they admitted Black undergrads in 1955 was because the federal courts told them to. So now the federal courts are telling them, now the federal courts are telling, oh, you don't have to anymore. I mean, so this is not only ludicrous, this is absolutely obscene, it's heinous, and it's really embarrassing for this nation.
Well, this is part of American exceptionalism, meaning that as white people, we're just exceptional in terms of how we can be willy-nilly, as I say, with legislation. I think that what we have to, I look at this in a couple of ways. One of the ways in which I look at it is that one of the things that the intentionality is that there's some good ideas. Brown versus Board of Education had good intentions. It was intentionally rolled out not to work. Similarly, the same thing it was with affirmative action. It's a wonderful concept, but it was intentionally rolled out not to work. And so with reinscribing the bad way in which certain parts of these affirmative programs rolled out, white people have used it to say that it discriminated against them. But the interesting thing about it is that the Bakke case, the North Carolina case, that the white students who brought the lawsuit against these universities, they were not qualified. Just think of that. The conception that they're not qualified and that a Black person could possibly, or a person of color, could possibly be more qualified. And what a lot of Asian students, as I see it, is that they flipped the script. They beat them at their own game, So here they are, the model, minority group here, and they figured, well, what we'll do now is we're going to put them in our category, use them as a proxy to say, now you see how it doesn't work? You have left out Asian Americans in your process. So, I mean, again, the concept was very good, but the way it rolled out was intentionally not to work. And then ideas to really correct it, they didn't want to move in that way. But I want to say this, Emmett, one of the things I thought was very, very interesting is that we ignore the importance of HBCUs and the brain drain, of many of us at these Ivy League schools that would be better served in terms of our scholarship, respectability, in terms of nurturing tender minds.
Well, I mean, and I hear this argument. I hear it a lot, and it has merit that the HBCUs are a way around or a way to rectify and reconcile. But Irene, I grew up in California. The closest HBCU to California is Langston University in Oklahoma, which was not, it just was not an option, right? And then, and I applied to the Morehouses and the Howards, but the financial aid opportunities, for lower middle class folks to dislocate, just it couldn't work. So I think we should have as many options as we should have. Here's the joke, though, because it's time for us to take a break. But here's a joke. Currently, most African Americans make up anywhere between 4 and 8% of the undergraduate population at most schools. Of course, you have exceptions, but usually there's like they'll say 10 to 12% black, but that black number includes African, it includes
The
Caribbean,
diaspora,
it
right?
includes the diaspora.
Diaspora,
So
right?
so domestic African Americans usually make anywhere between 4 and let's
Or
say
and
8%.
at
Okay,
at best, at best,
at best.
at
So
best, yeah.
are you telling me that 4 to 8% is some white person's or white family's seat? Like
Birthright.
we literally took their seat by holding space for 4 to 8% of the undergraduate population. That's a joke.
Yeah,
This is the All Rev'd Up podcast. We'll be right back.
yeah.
Well, let me just be clear. I got into Harvard only because of affirmative action. I went to a school no one had ever heard of in Denver, Colorado, in a small suburb. I didn't go to Exeter or Andover.
Yeah,
I didn't
right.
have college test prep. I just happened to be really nerdy and smart and have really good grades and good SAT scores.
Right.
But someone came to Denver, Colorado to look for me. A Harvard
Right.
recruiter flew to Denver, and I met up with her at the Village Inn restaurant and did a pre-interview to get to pull me into Harvard. I was pulled in, and the schools like Harvard and Yale that I got into affirmatively.
Yes.
And it was literally not saying we're going to take an unqualified person and put them
Right.
in Harvard.
Yes.
We're going to take a very qualified person who we would never know existed and put them in Harvard. That's how I got there. That's how Ketanji got there. That's how Justice Jackson, I should say. Justice Jackson got there. It's how Clarence Thomas got there.
This is the All Rev'd Up podcast. You just listened to Joy Reid of the Readout on MSNBC. That was from June 29th, 2023, bearing witness of her affirmative action narrative and how she got to Harvard. Irene, how did you get to Wellesley College?
Similarly, now, really, Wellesley was not my birthright. You're talking about a kid who grew up as a ward of New York City, going from foster home to foster home. And just like she, good SAT scores. I was nerdy, but with swag, because I'm from Brooklyn. You know what I mean? I had a little swag with my nerd. Okay, you see
I
what
hear
I'm
you.
saying?
I hear you.
And
I hear
stuff.
you.
But really was flown up there, and said we would very much like for you to attend Wellesley. And the only reason I thought I was going to go to Radcliffe, because a number of schools had asked me to apply once they saw my SAT scores, and the reason why I chose Wellesley over Radcliffe, I really thought I was going there to Radcliffe, but it's because I fell in love with the campus. Look, I couldn't even pronounce the name. I called it Wellesley. Okay. I had never heard of Seven Sister Schools. So again, when they came knocking on my door, it was like, really? And so I'm sort of like saying, who are you people? So yeah, similarly. But, I need to say this though, when I look back at that experience, I didn't enjoy the experience. It's very, very, because what I said before, social alienation, cultural, isolation, proving to professors over and over again that you not only can write, but you know something. Your life experience is not validated in any way in your writing, in just being on campus here. But I need to say this about Wellesley. Al Sharpton went to Wellesley. Not Wellesley. Oh my God, he'd kill me.
Really?
Yeah, right. I know. And that's not shade. Okay, that's not shade of any sort. But Al Sharpton and I went to Tilden High School in Brooklyn, New York. And also the woman who is now president of Wellesley, Paula Johnson. And so schooling, we had a very good public high school. That was very, very intentional. We were part of the College Bound program. And what they did was they plucked out the top students from the borough of Brooklyn and said, to prove affirmatively, if you give these students an affirmative chance to complete college, we can assure you they will also not only go to these top schools, but they will also complete college. And that was it. I think it's hubris to assume that based on someone's white skin makes you a better student or that you're more intelligent. The myopia and the ignorance in such a statement as and the point is this. Well, I felt that yes, I had, and one of the things Wellesley would always do, but Harvard wasn't any different. Do you have a right to be there? But yes, you do, and more so because the struggle was just that much harder to get there.
Well, we heard your story. We heard Joy Reid's story. Clarence Thomas came from the South and was recruited to go to Holy Cross as an affirmative action student. And he actually said the same thing. He was actually recruited to go to Harvard Law School and chose to go to Yale Law School, again, as an affirmative action student. One who was recruited, not solely because he was black, but clearly that had a piece of the decision. Similarly for me, growing up in Los Angeles, California, my parents pulled me out of public school, sent me to one of the, posh private schools that prepared me well. And I was set to go to University of Chicago to play basketball. However, the University of California, Berkeley, came for me. And I got a phenomenal education there and went through a program called the Ronald E. McNair Scholars. Remember, Ronald McNair was the black astronaut in the Challenger. And one of the trio programs, similar to College Bound, the Ronald McNair Scholars Program was for first generation, people of color who desired to go get a PhD. And it was a program that was, racially conscious, and that's kind of what put me on the pathway to where I am now. So I too am the beneficiary of affirmative action, but it does not mean that I was not prepared. It does not mean that like you, I was a cool nerd, but I worked hard. I did my work, right? And so it's really absurd that folks would think that we are given some white child seat so that the institution can say that it is not racist. No, we deserve those seats. We worked hard for those seats. And you and I and Joy Reid and even Clarence Thomas made great use of those seats. We graduated, we completed our degree programs, and we moved on. And at least the three of the four of us are highly productive citizens in this nation. I can't speak for your friend Clarence.
I know. And when you think about it, Skip was at Yale, not at the law school, but he was affirmative action. And Henry Louis Gates, this is the guy that says find your roots, and just a stellar scholar. Cornell West. I mean, we can just go on and on. So it really proves the point that it's not about racial quotas, just
That's
like
right.
you randomly just pick a black person and say,
Here.
you, okay, hey, you, okay, you here and stuff. But it is so much built into the notion of white supremacy that
Yes.
that just by virtue of white skin, it makes you inherently better, smarter, intelligent. And it's just the absurdity, because and to prove the point is that when we score higher than they do on tests that is designed for them to benefit, we got you. Because we're saying that we know how you think. Okay, you never asked me, because I used to finish these exams very quickly, and the proxy would say, the proctor would say, "Well, Irene, do you want to go over your questions?" I said, "Well, they never asked me a question. This is how you people think." Because I would have given. Well, we talk about epistemology. We talk about body of knowledge. So the point is that I understood that college was not about how I thought of my people's epistemology and cosmology. It was about how you thought and how much I could regurgitate that. That's why I said that the job was to make me an Afro-Saxon, but I fooled him. Shanika
did.
came through. Okay.
Ooh, did she?
Okay.
Ooh, did she? Well, you ought to come through with a closing word as we send our people on to maybe process and think about and reflect on what we've talked about. What is your final word today, Irene?
Well, this is an affirmative prayer for action. And this is what I want to say. We now reside in a divided society many of us have not seen since the 1960s. Our children are in the crossfires of our divided country. As their parents and guardians, it is our job to care deeply about their lives and safety in order for them to flourish and to provide them the start in life they deserve. We pray that they grow in intrigue and in wonder about the world around them and discovering their unique talents and gifts. But they can only do that with a good education. So we must affirmatively acknowledge each other's histories as American history. We must affirmatively acknowledge our wrongs, and we must affirmatively correct those wrongs. While division abounds among us, may we be bold and courage enough to chart a better future for our children. Why? Because children learn what they live. If children live with criticism, they learn to condemn. If they live with hostility, they learn to fight. If they live with fear, they learn to be apprehensive. But if children live with tolerance, they learn patience. If they live with praise, they learn appreciation. And if children live with acceptance, they learn to love. Let not our fears be exploited, our fragilities be exacerbated, and our divisions widened. We must be bold and courageous enough to chart a better future for our children, one that leads towards the dignity and sanctity of all human life. We must heal ourselves of the bigotry, the biases, and the demons that chip away at our efforts to build a just world. Why? Because our children are watching us. Amen.
Amen.
And Ashe.
Ashe. All Rev'd Up is brought to you by us, the Revs. Our amazing producers are Kyla Wright and Cavante Smalls.
Music for this episode is from Reverend Price's son and musical prodigy, Emmett G. Price IV. All Rev'd Up is distributed by GBH.
Additional thanks to Bob Kempf, Elizabeth O'Brien, May He, Devin Robbins, Meredith Neerman, and Zach Waldman.
If you like what you hear, let us know. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts and follow us at All Rev'd Up Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
Feel free to send us a note, a question, or a comment to allrevduppod@gmail.com. We'll be back